Barbara, it's great to be here with you talking about the Kennedys. I think both of us having grown up Catholic, I think the Kennedys have a particular resonance for us. But I wanted to start right off and ask you, you're a Supreme Court scholar, a presidential scholar. How did you get interested in Rose?
Well, I've been interested in the Kennedy family since I was a little tyke. When I was 4 years old, my mother took me and my brothers to downtown Louisville, Kentucky. We lived in the suburbs, and she piled us in our '56 Chevrolet and drove us downtown to the courthouse. She was completely drawn to this new candidate on the scene in the presidential race, Senator John F. Kennedy.
You think because he was Catholic a little bit?
I really do.
Yeah.
I have to think that was a major part of it, in addition to which he was about her age, so she was that new generation to which the torch was being passed. But I always point out that while she loved history and politics, she really wasn't that active in grassroots politics, and she didn't even particularly like driving downtown on very busy streets. So I know that it was his charisma and probably his Catholicism, and let's face it, his handsome looks.
He's a pretty good-looking guy.
He was a good-looking man, and I think she was drawn to that too. And so she got there extra early with me as a 4-year-old and my 2 older brothers in tow, and put us right in front of the podium so that we would be sure to see him.
Oh my gosh, that's great. And then you did a lot of your research up at the JFK Library after they opened up some records, and tell me about that, because that gives you something new, some new insights into Rose.
Yeah, this book is the one that's fully based on her papers that opened up in the fall of 2006, and it's a cute story the way that happened in terms of my finding out about it. I had been teaching at Sweetbriar College for many years and had published a book on Jacqueline Kennedy and her first ladyship. And my students knew that I was interested in all things Kennedy, and I happened to be on leave. I was at the University of Louisville, which is my alma mater, and I got this email from a former student, an alum of Sweetbriar College, and she said, "Did you see that Rose Kennedy's papers have just been opened?" And I said I hadn't seen it, and so I went right away to the article and started devouring it, and then decided, oh, this has to be my next project, in between the Supreme Court scholarship.
And then in those boxes, there were letters from Rose to her children, right? And some of them were quite, I read in your book, they were quite scolding. I even enjoyed the fact that she was after John Kennedy, when he was in office, to shape up a little bit in how he presented himself and his manners. And well, tell me about those letters.
Right. Well, first of all, these boxes, there were 250. 250 archival boxes, and then I went through another 50 of her family photographs. So the book contains a number of photographs that are rare and have never been seen before. And I was just amazed at the letter writing prodigiousness of Rose Kennedy, that from the time she was a young woman, and in addition to the 250 boxes of her official papers, I came across on the internet private letters that were held in private collections, and I've been able to gather some of those together as well.
That nobody's written about
That
before?
no one's written about, because
neat.
no one's had them except the families of the original people to whom she sent the letters.
Right,
so there are at least a half dozen that she wrote over the times she was a teenager to her childhood friend, including about how she wanted to go to Wellesley College, which was a plan thwarted by her father, Honey Fitz, but all the way up until middle age. When she talks about her husband's time in Hollywood and even mentions Gloria Swanson. So the letters, in addition to the ones that I found, the ones that are officially open at the Kennedy Library, yes, Rose was the typical, I would say, Victorian mother, always interested in how her children looked and behaved and their manners, and she never gave up until she literally could no longer write. Sadly, in the later part of her years, she had strokes and she became an invalid. But up until that point, for all of her motherhood, she was constantly after the children to be better and in fact to be, in a Victorian kind of way, as perfect as they could be.
So that word Victorian, she very much tried to fit herself into that mold, even though all around her things were changing. Like, she was born in 1890, right?
That's right.
So the suffragette movement was kind of going strong in her 20s and early teens, but she didn't step into those roles. She kept a very Victorian role. Why do you think that is?
I think because she was raised in such a conservative household and a conservative Catholicism at that time, a conservative society. She was a woman, she was a girl, so there was no way that she was going to be trained to be the kind of public office holder that her father was and that her sons would become. Having said that, I think her life is filled with paradoxes, and that's one of them, that while she was not a feminist and did not begin as a suffragette, she sort of pushed the boundaries as far as she could within those parameters of her family and her society and her religion. And pushed them as far as she could to become the vocal spokesperson for the Kennedy family whenever possible. And she was trained to do that by her father, Honey Fitz. So she'd go out on the campaign trail with him when she was a teenager. So she, in some ways, was pushing the envelope, as they say, but in others, she was certainly not a suffragette. She was not a feminist by any stretch of the imagination.
You know, before we talk about the role she played in forming that incredible family, let me go back to something you said about Wellesley. Now, what do you think was important about her father not letting her go there?
Right. Well, the story is that she had her heart set on going to Wellesley. She was an A student coming through high school. She went to the Dorchester High School.
So there was intellect there.
There was definitely intellect. She was a very bright woman, and she herself strove for perfection in all things. So she loved trying to be the perfect student, usually lived up to her own high standards.
Right.
So she thought she was ready to go to Wellesley, and probably was. The story is that the Archbishop of Boston encountered her father, the mayor of Boston, and said, this wouldn't be a very good idea politically for you, the Catholic mayor, the Irish Catholic mayor of Boston, to send your daughter, your eldest child, to a non-Catholic institution.
Oh, I see.
So that thwarted her plan, and she expressed to Doris Kearns Goodwin late in life that that was one of the saddest moments of her life when she found that out, and that she regretted it for the rest of her life.
This was a woman who did not express much regret about anything.
She did not. She was, I often point out the picture on the front of the book. At first I was a bit distracted by the goblet of water that seems to be in the forefront, and then I decided this is the perfect metaphor for Rose Kennedy, because if folks will notice, it's exactly half full with water. And that was how Rose usually viewed life. She was the eternal optimist. That doesn't mean that in private she didn't have sad moments, but generally speaking, she tried to keep this optimistic, upbeat approach to life and tried to have her children do that as well. And then in addition, though, not to being able to go to Wellesley, her father, to add insult to injury, sent her away to a Prussian convent abroad. A convent. Not that she was going to become a nun, because she had fallen in love with her future husband, Joe Kennedy, as teenagers. Absolutely. And we think that was part of the reason that Honey Fitz sent her abroad, was that to get her away from Joe Kennedy. The Kennedys and the Fitzgeralds were not always political allies in Boston politics, and so Honey Fitz was not completely approving of Joe Kennedy.
They were rivals at one point,
They indeed at times political were rivals. Indeed. So this was a problem for Rose's father, to see her fall in love with, in sometimes rival son, I say Joe Kennedy, and he also had picked out a suitor for her and wanted her to marry a neighbor boy who was also Catholic and Irish and was doing well in the business world. His parents were in construction. So Honey Fitz thought that would be the perfect match, but Rose was not to be deterred even by what started to be 2 years at a convent. She persuaded her father to send her back to the United States after 1 year.
So in her own way, there's an independent spirit expressing itself already.
There is, which I find ironic, because when her daughter Kathleen decides that she's going to marry Billy Hardington, the Protestant nobleman, during World War II. This is Kick, the effervescent child of Rose, and in, I think, many ways like her mother, but oftentimes that creates conflicts between parents and children when they're the closest. Indeed. And so I think it was ironic that Rose didn't seem to remember how, in a sense, she thwarted her parents' wishes by marrying Joe Kennedy, and Kick was not to be denied, and of course she did marry Billy Hardington. Sadly, the marriage only lasted 4 months, and he was killed in Europe after the invasion in 1944.
So let's talk about Joe. So Joe, I mean, Joe gets a lot of credit for this family, and he was a patriarchal figure and larger than life, and even some of the sons sort of gave him credit for spurring this family on to greatness. But how did that marriage work? Because your book makes the point, and you see a lot of it in the research that you've done, that Rose was a partner and was a significant player, especially in Joe's absences, in forming this family.
Right. Well, I would say that the marriage was built on love. There's
Yeah.
no doubt about that. I think they both loved each other very much. And by looking at all of Rose's letters as well as
9 children.
9 children,